The Unbroken Place podcast with Eddie Paul Thomas is a production of Say Something Studios. Welcome back to The Unbroken Place, where it begins and ends with empathy. I'm your host, Eddie Paul Thomas, life and leadership coach, and this week I had the pleasure of sitting down with actress Annie To. Annie is a film and TV actress based out of Los Angeles. She's currently playing Medic Wien on the HBO Max show The Pit, as well as Sunny Sheck on the Starz show Power Book 3, Raising Kanan. She is Chinese Vietnamese American, born and raised in LA, and also teaches theater and visual arts with the nonprofit performance arts education organization PS Arts, and volunteers with young storytellers to help young students write their own stories. It's a fun and inspiring conversation about the importance of finding your own voice in storytelling. So sit back and enjoy. Let's go. Well, Annie, thank you so much for joining us here on The Unbroken Place. It's exciting to have you.
Oh, it's so great to be here speaking with you, Eddie. I can't wait to have a conversation.
Yeah, me too. So for those who are just joining us, we are joined by a really cool guest this week. We've got Annie To. She is an actress, an educator, and we're really going to try and unpack the ability of people to express empathy through storytelling. And you have a lot of experience with that, Annie. You want to give people just kind of an introduction into you and how you got started in all of this?
Gosh, yeah. So I am an actress. I'm a film and TV actress currently by way of teaching. So I currently teach with a nonprofit, performance arts. I also volunteer with a nonprofit where we help fifth grade students write screenplays through an 8-week course. So yeah, I've been around students a lot. I currently act, and a lot of my life experiences informs my acting. Yeah, that's the short bit of my journey.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if the people watching or listening, depending, know this or not, but she is on a show called The Pit. She amongst the many other things that we've done. But I have been watching this with my wife, and we are absolutely just enthralled. Like, we finished season 1, and we're already asking, where's season 2? Like, all right, where's this thing? It is so intense, and the way that I would describe it is almost episodic, where it's you don't leave that day. You're there for an hour of the day, but then you come back to the next show and you're continuing the same story. And so over the course of the season, you're literally living out one full day with all of these characters. How was that for you? Like, in terms of your preparation for that and like getting into the empathy of what your character goes through. How was that process for you?
Thanks. So yes, I'm on The Pit, and I play Medic Wing, and she is a paramedic. And I used to work at a nursing facility during the pandemic. I wanted to do my part, and I wanted to just volunteer at this nursing facility. But they said, well, we're not accepting any volunteers, but we do need temporary CNAs, certified nursing assistants. And I said, all right, well, wherever you guys need me, put me in. So I was doing that for a couple of weeks, and then they saw that I had more skills administratively. So they put me as a manager on the weekends. So that whole life experience has helped me see that medical professionals, they have to know a lot of their shit when they're working, you know? It's The Pit encompasses this environment of like a calm chaos. And that's what I experienced as our nursing facility slowly succumbed to the pandemic. You know, it's this quiet pride of all of the staff working together and doing as much as they can, even though things are changing so much, like every hour. And I think The Pit exemplifies how much that environment changes so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I could think back, not just to the episodes, but just to some of the earliest things that influenced me in terms of,
Mhm.
learning to have empathy for other people, being able to, try and live in someone else's shoes for the first time.
My gosh, yeah.
And one of those first experiences was following my grandfather to the hospital. He was a doctor, and just seeing all of the stuff that they experienced in a day. And I'm just curious, with your work as a CNA,
Yeah.
how did that kind of shape your empathy,
Mhm.
from that, because that's an extreme,
Mhm.
to jump into something like that. How did that shape your ability to find empathy for others in,
Mhm.
just not the most extreme cases, but like just
Yeah.
everyday things?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my patients at the nursing facility, they were always in some kind of range of recovery or in pain or discomfort. So you kind of have to accept and like lose your ego doing that kind of work of just like this
Mm,
is someone who's in pain. All I can do is try to make them a little bit more comfortable.
yeah,
Um, so that's where that empathy grows, is recognizing that people, especially my patients, were in varying levels of pain, and that helped me. Well, I mean, personally, my dad, he had a lot of like health conditions.
mm,
When I was younger, he was always like angry and shouting, and he and my mom were always fighting. So it was a very like difficult and kind of dysfunctional environment to grow up in. But
yeah,
when I got to my mid and late 20s, I started to see that this was just someone who's in pain from all that
yeah,
medical issues. Um, so once I saw that, I was able to react with kindness. Like I remember one of the very early times that I spoke to my dad with compassion and kindness, as an adult, and it changed him. Like I saw how it affected
mm,
him. And I think those
yeah,
are like pivotal moments in being able to empathize with others, and recognizing like once we change the way we're reacting, they become different as well.
yeah. That's I think that's so true. And many of the experiences that we have in life, just to take that perspective, that we learn from some chaotic, extreme situations, to be able to come back and have that empathy for others, even
Yeah.
when they're not not the nicest person on the planet, for you at that time. It can be transformative, in our
Mhm.
relationships.
Yeah.
Um, and as a teacher, I'm just kind of thinking through, how you might be able to bring empathy into your teaching,
Mm.
for your students. How does that process work for you?
Mhm. I will get to that. I had a small-minded question for you. Like
Oh, okay.
when you were following your grandfather around seeing his patients, like was
Mm,
it helpful for you to see like was it grandfather or father? I'm sorry.
grandfather. Yeah,
Okay, great.
yeah,
Um, like you were probably seeing how he was reacting to his patients too, and that was helpful
yeah,
for you.
yeah. I think it was. I don't often tell the story of following him around. I'm
Yeah.
actually the namesake. I'm Edward Paul Thomas II, so I'm named after my grandfather.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's
for some
fun.
of the yeah, right. For some of the people who may be listening for the first time, I wrote in my book that my grandfather was one of the first African Americans allowed to practice medicine in the state of Indiana. So there
Oh
was like
my
that
gosh.
extra bit of pride, but also a little bit of pressure to
Yeah.
to follow in those footsteps. So, but watching him interact, um, was almost surreal for
Mm,
me. Like he was just this huge figure to everyone in the medical community, including the patients he served. But he treated all of them like family. It did not
mm.
matter how irate or how much in pain those individuals were. When they came to see Dr. Thomas, they knew, okay, Doc, blah, and I'll tell you another story another time about me being working. I use air quotes, for that,
Uh-huh.
working in his office, for summertime. Um, but I'd hear these patients, have you know, intense words. Hey, this thing is not working, blah, blah, blah. And he
Yeah.
would just, he would take the temperature level down
Mm.
50% with
Wow.
just a wow, like letting them know, I know that's tough. I can understand that. Well, tell me more about this. And it was always a question, as opposed to, no, you don't, you should be taking your medicine like this, or like, it was almost as if every person um, was able to kind of come to their own conclusion
Yeah.
of, oh, if I did sleep a little bit more, this wouldn't be a problem. Oh, if I didn't eat so many donuts, I wouldn't have this problem, or whatever it is. He would kind of ask them questions that would help them lead to solutions. And they thought he was the most brilliant person on the planet. But for me, as a 10, 11, 12-year old, follow him around, I'm like, all you did was ask him questions. And it was just very um important for me. As I started to watch him, I learned how to listen a little bit better,
Mm.
which is almost impossible for a teenager. But
Yeah.
I was taking notes. I was certainly taking notes, and so it was very informative for me as a teenager, just seeing my grandfather do what he did every time I worked in his office.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
thank God that your grandfather did what he did, decided to pursue that and like,
yeah,
go through those hurdles, I'm sure, to become such a prominent person at that
yeah,
time. And then thank God for you leading that healing skill, passing that on and continuing that on too.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's really incredible.
It certainly helped as I moved into the mental health space,
Mm,
working with various departments and in different ways completely, whether it be first time pregnant moms or persons experiencing homelessness.
hmm.
Without empathy, without taking a moment to get to know that person and letting them know you actually give a crap,
Yeah.
forget it. It's transactional, and they're like, here, just give me the sandwich, give me the paperwork, whatever, move
Hmm.
on. But they when they know that you're invested,
Hmm.
it's a completely different experience. And I know that your students have to have that same feeling with you. But I want to transition back, because I know that you didn't want to talk about yourself too much, but I'm gonna blast you anyway. Um, I really am interested, especially looking at middle schoolers, right?
Hmm. Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
middle
I
schoolers.
mean, TK to six, well, TK to middle school. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I mean, that's a seriously formative age,
Hmm.
and I'm just wondering how you bring empathy into that space, the rehearsal space for those students.
Yeah. Well, very much just like, you at 14 and following your
Hmm.
grandfather around, like being
Hmm.
able to listen and develop that skill of active listening and observing,
Hmm.
and not in like a dissociated way, just like, like being in the environment and being aware of things, but actually actively part of that environment where you're taking it in
Mm.
and realizing that you have a power to, and that power is listening, and that power is responding in a powerful way of just like asking questions. um Gosh, that is like such a beautiful skill to help students develop at that age. One thing that we do with middle school students is that we lead council, which is a
Hmm.
practice where we like gather in a circle and we practice storytelling, and
Mm.
storytelling one at a time, and practice active listening, and practice uh, like holding space for others.
Mm.
Um, so with that practice, middle school students are able to share their experiences, and they're, you know, listening to what other people, their peers, are experiencing. Um, and
Mm.
that causes them to be self-reflective in maybe their own privilege, or maybe their own lives and
Right,
experiences.
right.
So I love counsel. I love it when students go through counsel, and You see how it affects them. You see how much more aware they are of what their peers are going through.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful to see those gears start clicking in their head.
I wonder how that transitions for those students, and maybe you see this as you work with them,
Hmm.
um, when they are attempting to play a character that's just so different from them, just diametrically different.
Oh yeah.
If a kid is culturally different, or they come from a different socioeconomic status, how do
Hmm.
you help them when it comes to developing some depth uh, for those type of characters?
Mm. I mean, their instinct is to just say the words as themselves. They're
Mm,
not really changing themselves as characters, which is beautiful because then
mhm,
they're just putting themselves in those shoes without really like I don't know, metaphorically tying on the shoes or
mm,
even
okay.
like taking a step with those shoes. They're kind of just standing in those shoes for the moment. They're just
Yeah.
saying the words without really changing themselves. Um, so that is an important step of just like, all right, hear the words, feel the words. Now let's play. Now let's lead with a different center of your body. Now try saying those words, but as if your nose was the one leading your entire body. And see
Hmm.
how that feels differently. Now try saying those words if you're just the top of your head was leading your entire body, and how does that feel? You're constantly looking down if you're leading at the top of your head, like
Hmm.
the very tippy top. So how does that change
Yeah.
your perspective? And they get it, like as soon as especially for middle school students, as soon as their body changes, their mentality changes, their perspective changes. They
Mm,
realize, oh,
okay.
if I walk with my chest leading like a
Mhm.
superhero does, that makes me feel more confident.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we play. All right. Well, this character is very nervous. So we're very nervous and anxious. Like, where do you think they lead with their body? And then they play around. All right. Well, it's definitely not the chest. Maybe it's the feet. Maybe it's the
Hmm.
elbows. Then we empower them to discover and play.
Yeah. It's a very somatic
Hmm.
experience, that I could see that. I had the pleasure of doing a little bit of acting on up into college. Nothing major. Just like took some acting classes, and we would do these performances and whatnot. And so
That's
it would
awesome.
seem very strange to have somebody who's supposed to be meek and mild walking around, with their chest poked out, or
Yeah.
someone who's supposed to be boisterous,
Hmm.
um, you know, sitting with the slumped shoulders. So it's a very physical thing,
Hmm.
where you kind of hold um, the life of a character, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious if there's been a role for you that
Hmm.
really challenged you, in your capacity for empathy.
Mm.
And it could be on stage or screen, what have you, but just has there been a role that just really challenged you? Like you did not like that person, but you played them to the
Mm.
best of your ability and made them come across well.
Wow. Uh, I have played like unsavory characters,
Hmm.
but I don't think I've ever played like an actual villain. That's
Hmm.
that's not typically like in my I don't know, like how I'm typecast. This like 5'2" petite Asian woman is not normally the villain.
Gotcha.
But I
Gotcha.
have played like a drug dealer. I have
Mm.
played someone with, oh yeah, permanent resting bitch face. Thankfully, that was for like a comedy.
Hmm.
So I think the empathy there was like learning to, okay, this is not just someone who's always sour. She's also like the lead character's best friend. So how else if
Oh, gotcha.
supportive?
Yes.
So not seeing, I think what helps is not seeing maybe villainous characters or unsavory characters as one dimensional, but finding the
Hmm.
complexities, like how we are all complex and how
Yeah.
we hold multiple contradictory beliefs all at once.
Mm,
Um, that we can be a mean and angry person, but that comes from a place of being protective, or
mm.
that comes from a place of love, So finding all these different dimensions helps me empathize with unsavory actions or unsavory attitudes.
Yeah. See, I find that fascinating because there's in the work that I do, working with different clients,
Mm.
there's a small number of them who feel like they have to play a role when they walk through that door,
Oh.
and they're not. You don't really get to see who they are. So
Mm.
when they play the role, it's not necessarily the villain, but they can't be 100% themselves. Some of them feel like they can't even be 10% themselves. They have to
Mhm.
be manager, they have to be director, they have to be, C-suite, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm curious about, well, I guess I'm not curious about that. I know that we all at some point in our lives end up playing that role of,
Yeah.
not necessarily being fully Eddie or Annie in a given space, but I look at those characters that are not you whatsoever.
Yeah.
And do you happen to have that experience when people come up and connect with you from a character they saw you play, and they're like, "Oh, you're so much nicer than I thought you were.
Uh,
Ooh, you're so much more rude than I thought you would really be." I mean, has that ever been your experience?
um, I don't I don't think so. I don't think they come I think because um the people I portray have, I don't know, they hold love in their hearts. So I think that shines through. I don't think I've ever
Okay.
had anyone come up to me and say, compare me to a character. Um, yeah, I don't think so. But it's interesting because as you talk about your clients, it makes me wonder if
Hmm.
people decide not to be their authentic selves because it can be seen as a vulnerability that,
Yeah.
you know, detracts from their title. Is
Yeah.
that what is happening?
I think there's some validity to what your question is there, because
Mm,
there are some who feel that they can't be a
mm,
certain way or be vulnerable because that's what they've learned, in that environment. So they've watched others ascend, up from this point to middle management to directorship or whatever it is, and
yeah.
well, if I'm gonna make it here, I've got to be this hard nosed, unlikable person who just gets the numbers. Whereas there are other clients, who I had those conversations about conscious leadership and, allowing people to come in just a little bit and letting them recognize the human being in you.
Mhm.
And you doing the same, realizing that that person isn't just a cog in the wheel. They've got a story that's going on long before they even walk through those doors. Uh,
Yeah.
they've got a family, they've got, friends, they've got kids, whatever it is that's going on in their life.
Mhm.
Um, Work isn't the end all be all. In most cases,
Mhm.
work is not necessarily the love of their life. It's something they have to do
Yeah.
to survive outside of those doors. So, um, but yeah, I would say that some of them, and it's a small number. Well, let me change that. I would say in the beginning, the majority feel like they can't express
Mm.
empathy. They can't, let people in other than maybe a joke or two here and there. But
Yes.
eventually, through a little bit of coaching and talking through, they're able to kind of break through and have those moments, where
Yep.
they're like, okay, you know what? I did drop 10% of my ego, and people performed better. People
Mm.
trusted me more. They communicated with me. And I feel like your characters, when you play them, the authenticity comes through.
Yeah.
There's what's on the script and there's what Annie portrays. And there's a
Yeah.
big difference. And I think it shines through. Uh,
Yeah. The most common comment I get is when so I'm on Power Book 3 Raising Canaan on the Stars Network,
mhm,
and I play this 90s era Chinese accented um wife and mother.
mhm,
And for that role, they had to like, dye my hair to my natural color. I used to have blonde highlights,
Mm.
and they would have to dye my hair. So the most common comment I got was like, "Oh, I didn't know that you didn't that you had blonde highlights. Oh, that's different."
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah. I play someone who's, like, racist too, and thankfully, no one's coming up to me and saying like, "Oh, okay, you're actually, not a racist," you know? Thankfully,
How, so
that would
okay,
not be
let's
believable.
let's unpack that one a little bit, because
Yeah.
that's the part that I would struggle with quite a bit. If
Mhm.
I were to have stayed in acting and said, okay, this is what I'm doing with the rest of my life, I would have struggled there, because when you have to portray something that you are clearly not,
Yeah.
how do you wrestle with that? How do you pull out that performance
Mm.
for yourself? And I don't want to ask this the wrong way. How do you do it and still feel okay when that's not the type of person who you are?
Yeah. Um, when it comes to racism, I mean, sadly, that is a common thing seen by a majority of society.
Yeah.
Especially outside of the states.
Mm.
Um, we see each other by the color of our skin and make judgments, and I saw that a lot growing up with my family,
Hmm.
and they weren't necessarily negative comments, but definitely judgments made by the color of people's skin. So they didn't mean anything malicious by it, but of course, as I got older, I'm like, "Oh, no, you can't do that. You can't judge
Right.
people by how they look and what they wear and whatever."
Hmm.
So separating myself from that is
Yeah.
very akin to how I walk away at the end of a work day, being like, okay, that character was someone I'm familiar with, but I am totally not that person. Um, when I have to play someone like that, I have to believe that I'm portraying someone who is authentic and
Hmm.
who is out there. And because I know that this character is representative of an authentic kind of person, it's easy to be like, okay, this kind of person does live out there,
Yeah.
and they are complex because they have that comes from a place of love and protection and also fear,
Yeah.
um and portraying Sunny Sheck, living in being the minority in a community that was largely Black American. I could feel like, okay, it's coming from a place of fear, that judgment. So I could see that. I could see that as true for her, and then at the end of the day, know that, well, that is not true for me.
Hmm.
If it's something that is really challenging to step into, like, it happens for auditions. You still have to
Yeah.
play them authentically.
Yeah.
um I have to meditate a little bit, I have to journal, I have to
Hmm.
go back to the things that I enjoy and the people I love, the animals I love, go back to like the music that I love. That
Yeah.
all helps
Yeah.
to kind of recenter and just reconnect myself with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that, and I'm glad you shared that. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I could see it being very challenging. There's there have to be times where you are asked to play a role, and it's because you look a certain way, as opposed to just your ability to perform that role very, very well. And so it's
Mhm.
that that struggle is something that I've heard a lot of, just on podcasts and interviews and things like that. You hear a lot of actors and actresses, talk through that and say,
Mhm.
it stinks because I can play King Lear as a Latino or as a,
Yep.
African American, just like anyone else could, but they weren't looking for that look.
Yeah.
I didn't have the look of that part. And so it's, it's got to be redeeming sometimes when you can just play that role, but then there's also that duality of, well, I want to represent people from my culture well,
Yeah. Yep.
uh, also. So it's just,
Yes.
tell me about that tightrope for you sometimes.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean that changes with my own identity and acceptance
Mm,
and how I see those roles.
yeah.
Because when I was younger, I was totally resistant against playing people who speak with a Chinese accent because I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that's not me. Because I was born here. I was born in LA. I identify more as American than Asian
Yeah.
or more American than Chinese. Like when I was younger and I went back to China to visit family, they all saw me as American. They were like, oh, she is not one of us. So, and I found that, fine. Uh, but then when I went to college in a very rural Pennsylvania town, go Penn State, I got seen by the color of my skin. I got seen more
Yeah.
Chinese than American, and I got
Yeah.
harassed for being more Chinese than American. So then there developed like a whole identity and connection of like feeling shameful that I looked the way that I did, and then also
Yeah.
feeling shameful that I felt shameful. It was like a very conflicting part of my identity that like
Hmm.
people were telling me how I was looking and how I was identifying.
Yeah.
So it was very like tumultuous time, and I actually created like a short film called American Asian to kind of wrestle with
Mm,
that duality. Um, and the truth is, it's somewhere in between, and it all depends on the eye of the beholder. Um, I
yeah.
at that time, like 7 or so years ago, I started dyeing my hair and having blonde highlights as a way to like respond to how society was seeing me. I wanted to respond to how I was seen and say like, nope, I'm American. I'm more American than Chinese. Just look at my hair. And up until recently, I was like, well, I don't want my identity to be like that. I don't want it to be
Mm,
a response. I want it to be a statement.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was how that was a whole journey. I don't think I could have gotten here without having that moment of being so resistant and defensive
That
about
makes
my
sense.
my identity. Yeah.
That makes sense. The Unbroken Place podcast will be back in just a moment. What if the clarity you've been searching for isn't out there, but already within you? I'm Eddie Paul Thomas, life and leadership coach. I work with purpose-driven people who are ready to lead boldly, live intentionally, and grow from the inside out. Whether you're at a crossroads or leveling up, coaching can help you move with confidence, wisdom, and impact. This is your time. Visit eddiepaulthomas.com to get started. Imagine a place where the untold stories of Black missionaries are amplified, honored, and celebrated. A place that bridges the legacy of the people of the way with the powerful missions work of today's African diaspora. Welcome to the Black Missions Museum, a digital project dedicated to preserving the voices, culture, and legacy of Black missionaries across the globe. But we need your help to bring this vision to life. Your support makes a difference. Join us in this mission by donating today. Just click the link in the show notes to give and be a part of history. Together, we can inspire future generations and keep the legacy alive. In today's fast-moving world, thriving teams and ethical leadership are essential to business success. So how do entrepreneurs build spaces where people flourish while scaling up? At Elevate One Consulting, Dr. Erica Garcia Thomas and Eddie Paul Thomas are helping organizations grow with purpose. Blending evidence-based strategies, interactive training, and dynamic speaking, they equip leaders to boost engagement, transform culture, and drive results. From executive advising to brand revitalization, Elevate One delivers solutions that help your business do more than survive. It thrives. Visit elevateoneconsulting.com to get started. Elevate One Consulting. Innovate, grow, elevate. And we're back. I think also having the ability to travel, like you were saying, outside of the United States context, it
Mhm.
changes a lot for you.
Yeah.
Um, I can remember I played college basketball years and years and years ago, and
Cool.
had the ability to travel and see all parts of the world. Especially within the states, because Charlotte, North Carolina is very different than Indianapolis, Indiana, which is where I was born and raised, which
Hmm.
is very different than any part of California. So it's just, you meet different people and you hear different expectations of what people like you are supposed to be. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's like, whoa, okay, awesome. I feel like a superhero. But then there are those who are like, oh, I feel very bad about the way that I've been portrayed in their
Yeah.
mind anyway, somehow.
It's crazy
Um,
that that's like the BIPOC experience, right?
yes,
That's like
yeah,
what we have to deal with. It's not just who we are, but how we're seen by
yeah,
society and the community that we're currently in.
yeah. I told my friends when I was writing my book in 2022. This was just after George Floyd, and I had been speaking to a
Mm.
lot of people on different stages about how to build bridges and how to deal with biases and things of that sort. I was talking to a group of missionaries
Mm.
who were, believe it or not, dealing with that very thing. They were trying to figure out, okay, we are literally living cross culturally, but still carrying a lot of our American or Western biases.
Wow.
Um, and I said, if you look at the way that I experience the world when I'm here in the States, when people say, "What are you?" it's a matter of trying to classify me. Like, okay,
Hmm.
where are you in proximity to whiteness?
Hmm.
Where do I put you? Whereas overseas, it's, where's your family from? Tell me
Oh,
about your culture. Like, what are you? When I traveled to Mexico, for instance,
yeah.
it was not, are you black? Are you mestizo? What are you? It was, no. Tell me about your people. And it was like my shoulders came down from my
Yeah.
anticipation of what they were meaning. But no, it was a completely different cultural context, and they just wanted to know, who are my people? Are they from here? Are they from there? What kind of things do you eat? Because I didn't look like anyone in their community, so
Wow.
it's a very different experience depending on where you go.
Yeah.
um, and
Oh
it's
my
it's
gosh.
fascinating.
Yeah, that calls to mind exactly that triggering question.
Mm,
Where are
yeah,
you from?
yeah.
I totally got that so much as when I was younger, and I was very defensive about it. And as I got older, like very
Hmm.
similarly, I learned to appreciate just what they're intending, which is just tell me about your family, tell me about
Hmm.
how they were and how you came to be, from their journey, which is
Yeah,
so beautiful. Now I've really come to appreciate that question.
yeah.
And now it's helped me welcome my heritage a lot more, and it
Hmm.
makes me very proud of
Yeah,
who I am.
yeah. It's very different than the 17-year-old versions of us, or the 20-year-old versions of us, who are just like trying to figure it all out. And now you've
Yeah.
had that experience, you can navigate the world with a little more clarity and confidence in who you are.
Yeah.
um I would be remiss if I didn't take us back to something we talked about the other
Hmm.
day. um there's an episode that I guess it's really like two or three episodes in the
Hmm.
pit. If you had not seen it, a little bit of a spoiler here, okay? But we won't go into all the details. But it was such a gut punch to watch the mass shooting
Oh,
episode, where you don't see the mass shooting. There's no gory things from that. What you
yeah.
see is the aftermath, and how from the moment you bring in that first person to the hospital,
Yeah.
how chaotic it was. And you know it didn't matter if it was people who were who had been there for 30 years, or the newbie who, like, it was literally their first day. You
Hmm.
got to see and feel that emotional roller coaster with everyone.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, your experience of being an American, knowing what we deal with in this country in
Hmm.
terms of mass shootings, and then portraying that. What kind of things did came up for you as you were performing, and then possibly sitting on the sidelines watching
Mm.
your other fellow actors pull that off. What was that like for you?
There was a bit of a sense of gratitude that
Mm,
thankfully this side of mass shootings is getting seen now. You
yeah,
know, like there's so much conversations about gun rights and I don't know, mental health, but like let's see it from also the medical point of view of just like no, these are a lot of people who are being hurt and unnecessarily um, dying because of
hmm,
this event. And let's not so focus so much on the blame, but just that it happens. And that's just the beauty of the pit. It
yeah,
doesn't get too political that it becomes inaccessible for its experiences, but
yeah,
it just tells the experiences as they are. Um, that, gosh, seeing it all unfold, it reminded me of some emergency training that I did. I was a very like proactive young 20-year old, and that like
hmm,
I saw that my community, I saw that Torrance was holding these community emergency preparedness classes, and it helped us basically. It gave us like a first aid kit, told us how to triage if there was ever like a
wow,
mass event happening. It
yeah,
went by like a color code system. It told us where to put people and things like that. Um, and all when it happened, I thought, man, there's no way I would ever be part of this.
right,
So then to see it happen in the pit, I was like, oh wow, this is it being put into practice. And
right,
it's so informative, and it's so organized, and it gives me, I don't know, it gives me confidence in
hmm,
like our medical uh our medical systems. It gives me pride that like as America, we have our shit together in terms of healthcare, even though
hmm,
most times it doesn't feel like that. But in those cases, it
yeah,
shows that we can.
yeah. I think for me, it brought up, like, I think for my wife and I when we watched it,
Yeah.
obviously very emotional. You got to
Hmm.
see so many different characters that over the several episodes that you're watching, you kind of grow attached to. But for both of us, um, who've worked in that mental health space, for me, it drew me back to a very similar scenario in the Midwest. I was working with the mental health outreach team in Louisville, Kentucky, where we partnered with everybody. I spent a lot of time with the University of Louisville emergency psychiatric unit, and we
Hmm.
would help kind of triage when people would come in who happen to be experiencing homelessness. You know, do they need housing? Do they need mental health care? What is it? And let's work together and use these wraparound services to help them get to where they need it. Well, that was once a week, and it wasn't really a big deal. It was my service for the community and frankly, a part of the job. But then Hurricane Katrina hits,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't think that something that really destabilized Houston and Louisiana and areas around there would impact us in Louisville, Kentucky. But sure enough, we had 15,000 people who were displaced and transported to Louisville.
Oh
And it
man.
wasn't like they came in and we had housing ready and we had, transportation ready and we had all these things ready. There was nothing ready.
Wow.
So if you were homeless in that part of the country, you literally came to Louisville in the same situation. There were those. I told the story of a guy who had made like $300,000 to $400,000 a year as a car salesman with a dealership.
Hmm.
He had nothing when he came
Oh,
here. Nothing. Couldn't find members of his family. His he had no ID, so he
oh my
couldn't be
gosh.
like, look, I'm so and so, I make this amount, this is my bank account. All of it wiped out. And so I watched the chaos that ensued for weeks while we tried to help people find housing, medications that were obviously swept out to sea, all of the stuff going
Wow.
on. And that immediately hit me when that episode came on. And so not that it certainly didn't trigger me, but it took me back to that moment where, holy cow, you have empathy for everybody. Everyone is
Mm.
exhausted. They're working
Mhm.
around the clock. They're not able to just leave at my normal, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock time frame. No,
Yeah.
you're there until the job is done.
Yep.
And maybe you get some relief. But gosh, the cast and crew, yourself obviously included, just Eric and I were just destroyed when that episode was done. It was
Oh.
so well done.
Oh. Oh, that's so I'm so glad to hear that, that, the show was able to capture, that authenticity of what, you and others
Yes.
experienced.
Yeah.
Um, Gosh, yeah. Eh, I yeah. Being on set totally reminded me of the moment that COVID hit our nursing facility and just
Hmm.
how much people were driven by a sense of duty and a sense of purpose. They only had
Yeah.
a singular thing in mind, and like the show exemplifies, at the cost of our own mental health.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
have to keep doing the job even though mentally we're kind of all torn to bits and stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, does
Yeah.
that mean there was a process for you after those few weeks of, like, chaos that how did you reconnect with yourself and
Oh,
find
great
balance?
question. For me at that time, I had just begun studying
Mm,
mindfulness and meditation.
ah,
I am a believer, so I pray a lot, and that's great. It serves its purpose, but there are times when it's not enough.
mm,
And so for me, it's one thing to pray and then go work out, but then you're still there. You're still dealing with yourself and your emotions, and holy cow, I just saw this many people today. I'm used to seeing like 7 or 8 people a day, and I've got 35 and a caseload that
yeah,
I'm trying to figure out. So I was exhausted. And so learning, breathing techniques,
mm,
different uh, ways of trying to quiet your mind and just be, um, along with everything else, and eventually even talking to a counselor for the first time when I think I was like 30.
mhm,
Um, but just doing anything you could to really try and stay grounded and centered,
yeah,
through those moments. I was just beginning that journey then. But at that point, it was basically prayer and working out because
that's
I,
great.
I didn't really know anything else at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that you had practices,
Yeah.
find you.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say to most people, I probably stumbled bass backwards into those things, and they tended to work out for me. So I'm very
Yeah.
grateful for them, and for those who introduced them to me, because
Ugh,
it was tough. You know, every day, probably I'd say for about 3 months, we were just inundated with trying to figure out how to help people get connected to services, and helping them grieve, and
ugh,
in many cases where that's all we did was sit and help them, grieve the
mm,
loss of everything that they had known, neighborhoods that they'd grown up in.
man.
But yeah, so I'm curious if you know, I, I wouldn't say you're just starting out. You're far from just starting out. You've been doing this for a while, but I'm curious if what advice you would have for young actors or actresses,
Mm,
especially those coming from underrepresented communities,
mm,
about utilizing empathy in their roles that they're seeking.
mm, gosh. Um, I I my experience, getting into my profession, I didn't really have, like, a supportive teacher or
Mm.
adult, or like, really solidly any person who was like, "Yes, go for it, go for acting." It really came from a place of, like, my own desire, my own, like, truth seeking. I
Wow.
had to find the passion for it, um and once I found the passion for it, it was great, but you can't sustain that way. It's a very
Right.
lonely way to to pursue a career. So I developed like community. I found one great like castmate in early production, and we formed like an all female production team. And then I
Mhm.
also co founded like a collaborative filmmaking team. And I think finding like minded, supportive people, making sure that you're giving and they're giving back to you, and you're growing and you're helping them grow. I, I think helping, just finding that community that matches your
Yeah,
energy. You know, you already find this very fun, so wouldn't it be great to find other people who also find it fun and
yeah.
would, want to play with you, basically.
Hmm.
I think once you find that community, you kind of learn it's not about you in your head about your career. It's about also what you can give to others,
Yeah,
whether that's just listening or whether that's being a helping hand on set. Um, just realizing that you're part of a whole. And once you realize it's a very symbiotic relationship,
yeah,
I don't know, the whole world feels closer, and your heart expands and it's able to hold more space, and you're able to have more experiences because of that. And that only um, informs your skills as a performer too, or
yeah,
as your artistry. It doesn't have to be acting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I love hearing this because I've had this theory that's been proven somewhat in many cases that that the culture that we live in as Americans,
Hmm.
obviously there's subcultures depending on which group you're with, but um, we are communal,
Mm.
and what we are trying to do in our country right now is counter to that. It's
Mm.
hyper individualistic, and
Oh,
um, I've found in my research with clients and just the work that I've done for years that the more people are able to find a group, the more they are able to connect with their people,
yeah.
um, the better off they are in so many ways, emotionally, mentally, physically.
Mm.
Um, I mean, if you think about even some of the workout uh, tapes and I said tapes, gosh, there's some age for you right there. Uh, workout videos and the different groups that are out there, it's all based on grabbing a partner, that accountability partner, and you know going through it not alone,
Yeah.
but with someone else. And so
Oh,
um,
that's lovely.
it really is. I think that the more that we realize that, the healthier we'll be in many ways.
Yeah. Yes, I my middle school students, from their in their transition from like after school to spending time with us, they're all
Hmm.
on their phones. And it
Yeah.
drives me crazy. I'm like, you are surrounded by your friends and you're going to your phone, and
Right.
they're just isolating themselves with their phone. And then theater, when they're in our class, it's so weird. It gives them permission, I guess, to be in a group together, to put away your phones. And then like
Yeah.
you see that they enjoy each other. They love playing with each other. You're able to get that validation that you're a funny person, you're a smart person, you're a creative person.
Hmm.
And that's so helpful for their growth and self-confidence. And it's like it's crazy that growing up, we got that just from play or not having phones.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now we have to create that environment. We have to create those boundaries for kids because they're
Yeah.
just not developmentally able to do that for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I freak my kids out all the time when I tell them, hey, there was a time when I grew up where we had to memorize the numbers that we wanted to call, like our best friends. It wasn't just, call Bob, call Sue. It was literally, I had to remember the phone number and everybody's address because I wanted to be dropped off at, their house for
Yeah.
whatever. It's, it's a very different world, and finding that balance does include setting those boundaries for them. Hey,
Yeah.
let's only do 2 hours on the phone today, and let's
That's
spend
great.
some time in the garden, or let's go play, or whatever it is that we're going to do. But
Hmm.
yeah, that cell phone, for as many benefits as it gives, it also has some serious side effects too.
Yeah. One of my third graders the other day, for art class, he
Hmm.
wrote his mom's phone number on a big paper and was like, "Look, teacher, I know my mom's phone number." I'm like, "Wow, that is a really great skill. Yes,
Right.
that's important." It was really
Right.
cute how proud he was.
Right. That's so
Uh,
funny.
uh
Well, Annie, just kind of looking ahead, um, how do you hope empathy continues to evolve in your life? Not just as an actress, but just, also as a teacher, as a person.
Mm. Um, yeah, I think I think I'm starting to see and grow the different forms of empathy.
Hmm.
Um, for some reason, I guess prior to our conversation, I kept thinking about the movie Midsummer,
Hmm.
which is, it's kind of an indie film. It was pretty famous, but also not so famous. But it was about a woman who very cathartically grieves, and you empathize so much with that grieving. It just hits something in you, especially if you've experienced that type of grief over, like, I think it was the loss of her parents and her family. And to see that on the screen is so different, I think, because it was just about grief and the
Yeah.
catharsis that comes from releasing that grief. And I thought about it this morning because I'm like, gosh, that form of empathy is not so common because
Yeah.
we experience grief so privately.
Right.
Um, to be able to grieve together and out loud makes you feel better. Um, so as I go into my career more, I'm able to just experience the different ways that we empathize with one another, um, and to allow that there are different forms of empathy. Like, it doesn't have to be just listening; it could just be sitting still together silently.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm hoping that it just makes my heart bigger, and hoping that it helps the students learn how to grow their hearts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and hoping that what they're learning, they can pass on to their friends and their family. Um, Makes me think of how, growing up, we were not a family that said, "I love you" to one another. We didn't
Mm.
express love in that way. And it wasn't until college where I learned that, oh, other kids my age are doing that with their family. They're expressing their love like this, like
Yeah.
in reality. It's not just something I see in movies. So that first year that I went back home after college, I started saying I love you to my family.
Mm.
And
How did they respond?
they welcomed it.
Oh,
They were
that's
a little
wonderful.
bit like, "Oh, this is a little strange," but then they also started saying I love you back. And now we end every phone conversation with I love you. And
Yeah.
if we hung up too soon, we like call the other person back to say, like, I love you, by the way.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, are there, other than The Pit, which, again, Eric and I are waiting with bated breath for season two. Other than The Pit, are there any other projects coming up for you where people can catch your work?
Right now it's The Pit. It's Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, season 3 and season 4.
Wow.
It's other podcasts that I've been on. I mean, currently just auditioning a lot. I work also a lot with young storytellers. So
Hmm.
I'm on their website, youngstorytellers.org. Um, yeah, I don't know, like everywhere.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely list most of those in the show notes for folks.
Oh, great.
But
And if you wanted to follow me on Instagram, I forgot that this is a thing too.
uh,
You can follow me at It's Annie Toe.
okay, awesome.
Thank
Well, you'll get
you.
a follow in about 5 seconds here.
Okay.
Um, awesome. Well, Annie, this has been great. Thank you so much for dropping by, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. This was really cool.
Yes, I'd love that. End of
Yeah.
season 2. We can chat
Yes.
again.
Yes. All right. Thank you. The Unbroken Place podcast is presented by Elevate One Consulting. The show is produced by Say Something Studios. Learn more about both of these in the show notes. The show's music is performed by Kesta, Anthem of Rain, and Holzna scraps. Thank you for being a part of the Unbroken Place community. Look for an ongoing conversation on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also find some helpful resources at eddiepaulthomas.com. And make sure to sign up for our newsletter called OK on Second Thought on LinkedIn. Until next time, one love. Say Something Studios.